All right, we're going to get started. Thanks for being here. You guys are warriors to be here at the very end of this meeting. We really appreciate it. My name is Doug Lederman. I'm co-editor and co-founder of Inside Higher Ed. And welcome to FAST University, Accelerating Innovation in Higher Education. The title of the session is kind of an implicit rebuttal to an assertion that I think is widely held among a lot of people at a meeting like this, which is, and I think a little unfair, which is that higher ed doesn't innovate. History actually shows that higher education has changed over time quite a bit, adding whole sectors like community colleges and for-profits and whole new ways of delivering instruction, largely like through online, which we've had only in the last 20, 25 years. But it's probably fair to say that higher education doesn't innovate and adapt fast or fast enough. And that's increasingly true at times when the world around the industry is changing incredibly fast, blurringly fast like it is now. So we're here to talk today about a coalition of universities that have banded together to do several things, not the least of which is to prove that higher education institutions can innovate, can collaborate as well as compete, and that they can change sort of meaningfully, not over decades, but over years and even months. And with us today to talk about that are to my immediate left, Mark Becker, who's the president of Georgia State University. To his left, Mike Crow, one of our hosts and president of Arizona State University. And to his far left, Bridget Burns, who's the head of the University Innovation Alliance. So we're gonna go. That's as much of an introduction as they need and as we're gonna give. So I'm gonna start. I want to jump in and give you. It's sort of helpful to have a quick bit of background on the University Innovation Alliance, and start to turn to Bridget for that.
Yeah, so it's a group of 11 universities spread throughout the United States. They're all large public research intensives with a shared sense of urgency that we're not producing enough college graduates to meet our future economic needs. We're doing a terrible job when it comes to low-income students, to first-generation students, and students of color. And going it alone is a waste of time, energy, and money. And so these institutions are trying to find ways to scale up what already works on each other's campuses, to come up with new ideas for new projects and initiatives together, to address the achievement gap, to improve outcomes for students no matter what their background. And we hope to ultimately produce a playbook and also a method for scale, and ultimately transform each of our campuses into a national model for student success. So going it alone has gotten us as far as it would, and instead we think it's a time for a new method of working together.
I'm guessing both of you wouldn't mind jumping in on that as well. You want to follow up?
Yeah, I guess the only thing I would add is that what we're trying to gather here at a meeting like this are people that are innovators in all sectors, all realms, with one objective, and that is to enhance educational attainment and educational outcomes in one way or another. And as Bridget suggested, that one chart, if you saw the talk I gave earlier today, had a bunch of very large dark green to light green schools up in the upper left of the publics. Those are basically, most of those schools are our schools. And the notion is, could we make a serious dent on this inadequate outcome for college graduate production at the 50th percentile of family incomes and below? And could we do it at scale, and could we do it quickly? None of us can do that by ourselves. We're not formed into alliances except around sports. Now we need alliances around other kinds of things that are real and meaningful. We've been building many alliances at my institution, ASU. This is a fantastic alliance here with the 11 schools that we've got as a part of this, because we are literally, figuratively, practically innovating together, adapting and from our learning with each other, and we are going to see, because we're already seeing the early signs of it, dramatic and positive output changes in each of our institutions. Now, some institutions, and this is a really important point that I harass everyone on constantly, some of our universities admit A students only from high school. They only admit the upper 7 or 5% of the high school class. Some of our institutions admit A and B students from high school. And some of our institutions admit A and B students as freshmen, and then also very large numbers of community college students coming in who may have had an A or a B record in high school but didn't make it to college, or had a C record or worse in high school and went to the community college. And so we've got a spectrum of institutions all working together, and we're even going to be able to differentiate based on something that's a huge falsehood in higher education, which is the great graduation rates are all a function of inputs. And so how do we make that not the case?
Right, that's historically been the case.
Yes.
But I think to add a little bit more granularity to this, so that, we cannot do everything. So we're very clear and very focused as an alliance. So first, it's large public institutions, which graduates the large majority of the people that get baccalaureate degrees in this country, writ large as the large publics. But then every institution has a liaison, every institution has a fellow, and these folks work very closely together. This is not that we send out papers and emails. They actually get together, work in design thinking, work in teams, and pick specific projects, whether it's looking at how do you do undergraduate advising in ways dramatically different than what is the standard of the norm for our sector. How do you use adaptive technologies in learning? How do you move from the sage on the stage to the guide on the side using adaptive technologies in classroom settings? These are the sorts of projects that we take on, but the goal at all times is to get the scale. We're not interested in boutique projects where each institution is going to do something for 20, 30, 50, 100, or even 1,000 students. We're talking about projects that are going to reach tens of thousands of students at all 11 institutions.
Well, we have over 400,000 students in these schools right now, and we've set our goals. Bridget, you probably know the exact number, but our goal is something on the order of 100,000 additional graduates.
Originally, our goal was 68,000 additional students over the next decade, but we're now on track to hit about 95,000. Just
Above our base level
additional
activity.
Graduates, above what our baseline was when we started.
Well, even above our normal rate of growth. 100,000 additional graduates. If you can do that with the same faculty, same input, same things, I mean, that's a very significant change.
So the history I was given about higher education, in general, change hasn't come about except when pretty much under duress and distress. And I think the history of higher education, like a lot of things, is because institutions are made up of people, a lot of us only change when we have to. Your institutions in general, you're not in distress, at least in a financial way. And so what has sort of driven the desire and the felt need to innovate and change without sort of financial and other real duress and distress?
Well, this goes back to a meeting we had at in Aspen, Colorado, 2012-ish, something like that, 13-ish. And it was just Michael convened a group of presidents who he thought might be like-minded.
Carefully selected.
So it might be like-minded around, okay, are you willing to commit your institution, put your institution out there, and that you're going to actually produce more graduates? Understanding that the 11 institutions are heterogeneous, even though we're all large publics. It's a variety of institutions. Some of us are in large metropolitan areas, like Michael's institution and mine. Others are not. They're in more rural areas. And so that was the other piece of this. It's not going to be a one-size-fits-all. The question is not a specific technology, not a specific vendor, but can we figure out, to Bridget's term, a playbook, what actually works to actually increase graduation rates or to accommodate more students or all the above. And so, it started with a conversation.
So there was a genesis even before that. So Vartan Gregorian, the head of the Carnegie Corporation of New York in 2008, had been assembling a number of university presidents prior to President Obama's election. And he was advancing an idea that resulted from our discussions about how could the public universities rise up. How could we rise up to be of greater service to the nation? And we went all the way back to the idea of the national university, which was defeated at the Constitutional Convention in 1787, defeated when John Smithson gave his grant that created the Smithsonian Institution, defeated over and over, about 6 times before the 1850s. Ultimately, the land grants came up, and Vartan, who's a very thoughtful thinker about higher education, got everybody together, and we were talking and talking and talking. And his foundation ran full-page ads asking the national government to step up to help the big public research universities to engage at scale, to change things. And lo and behold, some of us, including me, that was a part of that group, we were like, frustrated to no end that we got nowhere. And so ultimately that then ended up in a small set of projects about next generation universities being studied by the New America Foundation at the time. And so our schools were a part of that. UC Riverside was a part of that, a couple of others. We got some traction by understanding some of these things. And then finally, we're basically got to go guerrilla here. We can't get the system to react. So we're like, well, we're going to move ahead anyway. So we get people together. It's not because of distress. It's because of the perceived need that we're underachieving relative to the scale of the opportunity. Not the scale of the challenge or the scale, it's the scale of the opportunity. Right. In a sense, we're at a step function. Most institutions are evolving in some sort of a replicant kind of way, a mimic kind of way. And we decided, let's get a group of schools together that are willing to have the conversation, set 4 goals together, produce more graduates, period, produce many more graduates from low-income families, period, lower the cost to produce a degree, period, and innovate together, period. And we found, after a year of discussions and debate and arguments and so forth,
no arguments. There were no arguments.
11 university and college presidents and chancellors that were willing to just jump off this diving board. We found 5 or 6 foundations that stepped up with us. We found Bridget along the way to help us both design the project, launch the project, and now help it to make it happen. And all of this was not a function of distress. It was conscious, planned innovation. And it's a little sad that our clusters are only about competitive sports. And that our clusters are not about achieving certain kinds of national objectives.
A lot of these guys want to talk a lot about speed, and we will get to that in a minute or two. But I guess there are a couple of things that seem relevant. So one of the you talk about sort of creating a structure. One of the problems in higher ed is we don't have a system of higher ed. We have an ecosystem, a constellation, but in general, and as a result, it's very difficult to get systemic movement. You're part of a state system.
Well, I was going to say, that's actually the advantage, and this was by design. So the 11 institutions, none of us, there are no 2 in the same state.
Well, right.
And we're generally recruiting students from different regions with limited or no overlap. And that's by design, because when you're in a state system, you're competing for the same students.
Right.
And it's a very different conversation. It's actually easier to get the kind of transfer of knowledge and practices with this collection of institutions than within my own state.
Yeah. But I guess that's where I wanted to go, was sort of, what is it? I mean, obviously the selection, I assume when you talked about they were well chosen, I assume, part of it was personality and inclination, but a part of it was geography and other things. So that's, right. So how do you get, because that's the thing, there's one of my views is that it's going to be very difficult for higher ed to move ahead without more collaboration across institutions, but it's challenging. We see a lot of sort of failed and short attempts at that. So just maybe a couple of minutes on just what makes that possible here.
Well, I mean, I think what makes it possible is that most college presidents can read pretty well, and so they can
some better than others.
Some better than others, but there's a national issue. You got half the kids that got Pell Grants have no certificate, no degree, nothing to show for their work. You got 15% or less of the people in the lower half of family incomes. That's a country twice the size of Germany.
Yep.
So 160 or so million people, 15% college attainment rate. A country the size of Germany, 80 million people in the United States have an 8% college attainment rate. So basically our public universities have to figure out how to tackle this problem and defeat it once and for all. And so what we found was 5 traditional, very successful land-grant schools, Michigan State, Oregon State, Purdue, Iowa State, and Ohio State. We found 2 quote-unquote flagships, whatever the heck that means, University of Texas at Austin and University of Kansas, the leading institutions in their states, and we found 4, whatever you want to call them,
upstarts.
Sun Belt upstarts. One in Orlando, Central Florida, one in Atlanta, Georgia State, one in Phoenix, us, ASU, and whatever you call the inland empire of greater Los Angeles, UC Riverside, in a massive, unbelievable metropolitan area. And so these schools, all different, came in. And so the desire here was every single one of us if there was a 5th goal that we were going to add, the goal would be that no students' family background, family income, or ethnicity will any longer in the future be capable of predicting anything relative to your success at one of these schools. Now, a couple of us, Georgia State being one, UC Riverside being another, have made huge progress on those dimensions that the rest of us haven't. So we're learning from them. They're learning from us other things that we know, and this has never occurred before. And it's never occurred before partly because we run institutions of higher education in anything other than a national model. Bridget.
Well, I would also say that we have a lot of bad experiences in the past from collaboration. I mean, let's just call it like it is. Most higher ed collaboration can be a bit of a bummer. I used to be a chief of staff for a university system, which is forced collaboration.
That would be Oregon.
Right? Then there are some collaboratives that it's, you get shoved in a room together and, okay, be friends. That doesn't work. Then there's, you and 1,000 of your closest friends where you don't actually get to know each other. So we had to make sure that we designed this collaboration so that it added value. One of the problems with collaboration is it's like the unpaid volunteer work that people expect you to do. People don't acknowledge that their plates are overfull. And then on top of it, we expect them, oh yeah, by the way, look around the country, see who's doing something similar, and go buddy up with them. It doesn't make any sense, right? We actually need capacity to do collaboration. So with the UIA, we have fellows who come and add capacity. So
each
it's
school
physically
has a
possible.
fellow.
Some of the fellows are here in the room today. And we also just want to make sure to design this so that it actually made campuses more effective. It added to their experience. It wasn't a drain. Most of collaboration, my experience as the person trying to force that, it often is a distraction from the work on campus. So we wanted to make sure that was not true.
Well, the knee-jerk reaction you get when you talk about any of the sorts of projects we're working on is there's only two answers you hear. Either, well, that won't work at our institution because we're different, which you've all heard it, or we're already doing that.
Or there's a third. I can't sit in the room with them.
Well, we don't allow
because
that.
their brand is not elite enough to be co-projected with our brand, and therefore, forget it, we're not going to work together.
And we all have examples, and we won't name names, but of institutions who have said things like, well, we're already doing that, but then when you dig deeper, no, not only aren't they doing it, they're not even close to doing it. But there's this pride thing because everybody's a successful university.
So every single one of these schools that signed up for this, every single one of them, the leaders of the school, the leadership team of the school, they want to see these four numbers change. They want to see the numbers relative to retention and graduation rate go away from being zip code predictable. They want to see graduation go up, diversity of graduation go up, income diversity of graduation go up, and costs don't go down. So lots of people would say, well, we're not interested in that. Well, those would be people that aren't really informed about what we actually worry about. So I think it's fair to say that all 11 of the schools and their leaders are very concerned about our inability to fix this issue that we're focused on.
And very importantly, the goal is not just to increase retention and graduation rates, because we could all do that by getting more selective, which is what many institutions do.
Just talk about that, Mark. Just say what you would do if you wanted to instantly change the status of Georgia State into a superstar institution. What do you need to do?
Well, the easiest way to do it would be to raise the admission standards, reduce the size of the student body, keep the same cost structure, so you'd have to increase your fees. And if you can pull all that over, your rankings immediately shoot up and you become more elite.
And then what happens if you add a medical school?
Well, you got to pay for it.
Then all of a sudden, your research numbers become really huge, then you're set. Yeah. All is done. All is good.
That's the old playbook.
All right, so let's turn our attention to the fast in the title. I would think, when you talk about speeding up the pace of change and innovation at institutions, I guess the questions I have are, does that require, I would assume it would result in more missteps and mistakes unless you're doing a lot more analysis before you launch things, or is it just iteration and quicker response when things go wrong? Because one of the bigger problems in higher ed is that failure is seen as first of all, nobody admits failure, nobody admits weakness.
We admit failure.
A few do.
We got all kinds of things that didn't work.
But
most of our things work. Some of them don't.
But I guess that's the thing. Does speed result in more failure, and is that okay, or are there ways?
Well, you got it at two levels. You got at the institution, the alliance, and what the alliance is there is to facilitate that speed. So again, the people doing this work, our teams are very deeply engaged with one another. So what they do is they sit down and they look at what people claim at their institutions is working. And then they do a deeper dive and then decide whether or not to commit to, we're going to do a project focus, for example, around predictive analytics and student advising. And so, one of the rules of the game, and I thought Mike was going to mention this earlier, because it's also part of this competition, is you have to open your data up. And so it's not that you just say, this is what we've done. You actually have to turn over the data files and let the other 10 institutions look at your data. And once they've done that deep dive, that deep scrub, they say, okay, there's something here. And to put this in context, you take something like the concept of freshman learning communities. That as a vehicle for enhancing student success has been around for decades. And yet today, some institutions are still discovering it. The goal here is to take recent discoveries, things that are new within the last few years, like predictive analytics and student advising, and accelerate that through 11 institutions if it works.
Analytically based.
Yeah, if it works. And so what you do is you do the deep scrub across the institutions to see if the evidence is there. And then the next step is, okay, can you scale that? Can you get 11 institutions to do this right now, right away, rather than waiting for 5, 10, 15, 20 years.
So the risk, let me just comment on the risk aversion. So the risk aversion in the sector has wounded the sector. And it's weakened the ability of the leaders in the sector to do the design changes necessary to get these performance outcome differences that we're looking at. And so in fact, if you operate in a different mentality, the mentality we operate in, I don't know what to call it other than design build. You design, you start the building process, the project, whatever it is, then you adjust the design based in fact on what didn't work, what you stumbled at, what about this, what about that. So you're constantly adjusting, as opposed to you're replicating a fixed object that someone else has built before. I need a great chemistry department. I see a great chemistry. I used to be on one of the provosts at Columbia. We had a great chemistry department of 17 faculty members or so. We had less than 100 undergraduate majors, I think less than 50. And so if you wanted to build a great graduate school-oriented chemistry department, you just looked at what Columbia did and you just did that. Well, that does not create any opportunity for any risk whatsoever. It's just basically mimicry. Mimicry no longer is adequate as a mechanism for us to address the things that we're trying to address. So we've gone into design, build, design, build, design, build. The alliance for us is unbelievable new design inputs to now inform our designs at ASU specifically to allow us to adjust more quickly, redesign, try this, that didn't work, forget that, try this. That's the way that a large, complex, adaptive university is going to have to work.
Yeah, go ahead, Bridget.
So we're dealing with this macro issue about college attainment, serving low-income students, but on a different level, it's really about diffusion. The way that ideas spread in higher ed is really antiquated. The way that we spread ideas are conferences. I'm keenly aware I'm saying that at a conference.
Sorry.
White papers, which are, by the way, designed for me not to tell you about the hard stuff. It's designed for me to tell you about my headlines, right? Okay. And so in terms of, if we think about the difference between transfer and coverage, like the main method by which we share ideas is designed around coverage, not transfer. And so we spend millions of dollars on conferences every year. Do they actually result in the transfer of ideas? I don't know. But I will tell you that when I went around the country to more than 50 universities investigating higher ed innovation, when I asked people 2 questions, I would start with CEOs, I would ask them, what do you think you're doing that's innovative? And I would ask the second question, which is, can you tell me something someone else is doing that's innovative around student success in your area? I never found a single person who could speak with any level of specificity to that second question.
You mean at those other schools?
Yeah, but in general, like, it just speaks more broadly, like, where do we get ideas? White papers that many people don't read, and if you go to a conference, like, maybe you hear a good idea and you go home and tinker in the dark.
And then your team says, well, we're already doing that, or it won't work here.
Yeah, and you don't have follow through, you don't have the first 5 steps. So what we've done is created a space where these 11 universities, their teams actually know each other. They pick up the phone. They're actually becoming friends.
We'll talk about how the different innovation clusters are working. Just talk about how that was your idea. Talk about how you got that going.
Well, it's just the radical idea that we're all actually struggling with the same stuff. Right? I know that
like
we're
financial
all,
aid, admissions.
Yeah, enrollment managers, some of the best ideas that I heard when I was out as an ACE fellow investigating this, I would find in enrollment management. I would talk to weird places at the university where you find people who are struggling with the same thing, and you go from campus to campus, and you're like, I know that the industry is designed to tell us that we're all a special, delicate flower, but there is a very consistent problem, and we are allegedly supposed to be the smart people. So why can we not get our act together and figure out how to deal with this? So I'm waiting for the new Clark Kerr of this next generation. It is not one person. It is a group of leaders who see that urgency is too important and are actually willing to act. So these presidents, to a level where we're sharing student unit record level data, right? Talk about like the third rail.
De-identified. It's all federally
when
compliant.
Clark Kerr was fired, when Clark Kerr was fired in January of 1967 by Ronald Reagan, the recently elected governor of California, who then became the president of the Board of Regents on that fact of his election, he was fired at the first board meeting of the first session, and he asked whether or not he should leave. It was the first vote. Should he leave right then, or should he wait to the end of the meeting? Because he was the only one that knew what the agenda was, and so they.
But the interesting thing is, so we have this issue of the institutions and then the alliance, and there's actually feedback that goes back and forth in here. So, for example, on my campus, what's happened is we've gotten more success. There's now a change in the faculty culture, and it used to be the faculty culture was, well, we can't do that because we might fail, or the president or the provost won't give us resources. Now the faculty culture is, well, we're expected to innovate. I've got a good idea, and they know that if their good idea gets traction, meaning which we fund it, we support it, that we only want ideas that go to scale, so that there's a real appetite among the faculty now to actually come forward and propose new ideas, new experiments, if you will, because it's all about experimentation. You try out your pilots, and the ones that work, you take them to scale. The ones that don't work, you figure out why didn't it work, and should you either throw it away or adapt it. It's the scientific method.
Well, that's what I wanted to get to, because again, in terms of when we're talking about the pace, it's an easy target in higher ed to say institutions don't change, shared governance gets in the way. So is most of this pace, the speed and the fast element at the institutional level, or between the institution and the alliance?
Well, first off, I'm cheating, right? Because I'm dealing with institutions who are more innovative, right? Now, granted, we have some all along the adoption spectrum. We have some on different projects at different spaces, depending on their culture. But I'm dealing with, you got these guys. And I mean, we also have John Hitt, the three of the most innovative college presidents in the United States, according to Washington Monthly. So, I'm not starting with a blank page. But between the institutions are more innovative. They already, by being part of this, show that they're more comfortable with certain levels of risk and have done something that shows that they are really aggressive about these issues. But it's between the campuses. So now we're at the point, at first it was like me, kind of like, hey guys, you two, think you guys would be a great match, you should talk together. Now they pick up the phone, they call each other, they come to me, and they're like, oh yeah, these three campuses, we've decided to do this project. And FYI, or what I love, and really for me is the sign of our success, I find out later that a campus has taken an idea from another campus, applied it, adapted it, added some new stuff to it, and actually have data results.
Right, let me just sharpen the question to Mike, because I guess, I imagine these are institutions that are further along that continuum in terms of having a culture, but when you started at Arizona State, it probably wasn't that way. So maybe since as much, I'm not sure why that keeps happening. But what are the requirements within an institution to create that culture? Because I think that's
one of the requirements is in our particular case, speaking now only about ASU, one of the innovators in now this cluster of innovators, and so we have a particular innovative approach that others can either emulate or not. They can certainly study it and look at it, and that is the notion that, are we an institution dedicated to the success of our faculty? This will sound funny. Or are we an institution dedicated to the success of our students, and then thus the community that they came from? We we changed that, we altered that. We got our faculty signed up for that, and then we said, guess what, we're moving too slow. We're not adjusting quickly enough. And so our faculty are, in one dimension of their existence, relative to faculty governance and so forth, they're moving at an unbelievably fast speed. Our faculty are creating at a fast speed. We changed the semester to 2 academic modules, 6 academic modules for the year. We move at different speeds, different times. We're about to then move to courses are done when you're done with it, when you've mastered the material, then you move on to the next one. And so we're changing clock speed on every dimension. You can't do any of that without the faculty, because they're and their support staff. They're the principal on frontline people that are making this all work. And so what we had to do was, in our case, we had to change the purpose of the organization. Not every college or university has exactly the same purpose, nor should they. Some purposes are not better than others. They're different than others. Some universities, and these universities in this alliance are the ones most likely to move in this direction the soonest, but not the only ones. I see Florida International here, another university. There's a number of others that are around that are moving in these same directions. It's all about then becoming what I said, a complex adaptive university as opposed to a mimetic replicant university. And so there's nothing wrong if you want to build another one of those, that's fine. But if they all are that, we won't be able to make this adjustment. So we've gotten everybody moving at a faster speed.
Yeah, I'd say a unwillingness to accept the status quo is inherent in all these institutions. And when we started doing our work on student success, and Tim Rennick, vice president of Georgia State, would give his talks around the country about some of our results, or our provost would be at meetings with other provosts and give her results, and I would be speaking, giving keynote addresses and others at conferences and give our results. To a person, we were told it's not possible. Everybody's tried it. Don't do it. There was this tyranny of low expectations. There's this tyranny that if students are first-generation low-income students, they are expected to drop out or not complete at greater than 50%.
And let me just add, Mark, because the system believes that they're unworthy.
Or the system was built for people who had a lot of.
System.
Well, the bigger system was built for people that had a lot more resources and supports, family supports and financial resources, things that those students don't have. But people had just come to accept, institutions had come to accept, and there's still a bunch of them in this country that still accept that low-income students graduate at about a 30 to 40% rate. And there are a whole bunch of institutions that are there. Now, I don't think any of them are happy or satisfied with that any longer, because the needle is moving, and that's part of what this alliance and other institutions like Florida International are showing, is that you can move that needle. But I think it has leaders that just refuse to accept what people had considered was normal, and basically said it's unacceptable, and then we just happen to be very impatient people.
Bridget, you want to add something?
Well, just that we have found that it's really the organizational design of universities is getting in the way of student success. And it's actually quite difficult to change the organizational design of your institution. And so we can tinker alone and just give it the old college try as individual institutions, or we can team up where you've seen, Mark has been able to transform his campus in 7 years or less. Mike has been able to do amazing things in the last 13, 14 years. John hit 23 years, right? So let's take the lessons learned, let's share. Now that we're actually friends, tell me the stories of failure. Tell me about when you ran into the wall, right? Because that's actually the really helpful stuff to drive change. It's not the shiny, happy headline stories. And I'll tell you what, I'm not going to share that on stage. I'm going to share that because I share my story with the people who've earned the right to hear it, right? So these campuses are starting to share those things, and so nobody has to we're basically, if we don't do this, we're sentencing other people to repeat our failures. And students deserve better. So for us, that's what this has been about.
So I'm going to turn to your questions in just a minute, so get ready to ask them. I guess the one question I want to ask, given where we are, is about the role of companies, the role of partners with driving innovation. I've been a little heartened this year compared to the couple of years I've been here in the past, a little more recognition from the companies that maybe they don't have all the answers, and that maybe they need to listen to the practitioners to hear what the problems really are, and less rhetoric about the failures of the sector and how we need to replace it, and more about collaborating. How do your either as as the alliance or institutionally, what is the role of the private sector? I mean, obviously your colleges are all, your universities are all working with these companies in different ways, but where do you see their role in meshing with your role?
No, that's the holy grail of all this. So, part of the reason that this work is now happening, and it's happening at a faster pace, is the technologies that enable us to accelerate are out there. But the holy grail is the technology is actually worthless if you don't actually have a way to integrate it into the system. 80% of any university's budget, I don't care where you go in the country, 80%'s in people. We're in a people business, and that's what we're all about, is educating people, transforming lives. But we're getting much better at using technology, and we're getting much faster at being able to do that. But the key part is being able to figure out how to use that technology. So, I've mentioned predictive analytics and student advising. Every university in the country could buy the same platform and get dramatically different results because you have to change fundamentally how you organize, and this is what Bridget just said, how you organize around students and supporting students. And if you don't make those organizational changes, you just wasted $2 million in software and a lot of time and a lot of people's effort.
I think what I would add is that we certainly could have achieved very little of what we've been able to achieve in transformation, like doubling the size of our engineering school in 8 years, tripling the diversity of that school, greatly enhancing the freshman retention rate, the graduation rate across the entire spectrum of society without unbelievable private sector technological tool-making partners. There's partners on collaboration, partners on content, partners on this, partners on that, all this stuff. We couldn't have done it, and we could only develop some of those tools ourselves. But we're smart enough and agile enough to figure out when we see the tool that someone else has developed, oh no, by the way, they're building the tool, we're still educating these students, and so it's not necessarily that we can do both of those functions, we can't. But we can now integrate them, network them, link them, try them out and move them forward. So for us, it has been a wonderful experience to work with so many dozens, scores and scores of companies that we brought in and tied together to help us to be able to do this, happily so. Those innovations that we've adapted then now are available to the other schools, and they can see what we've done and decide what they need or what they don't need. And in a theory, back to what you said, Doug, was the notion of the fact that the overall system didn't recognize the core.
And what's an important part for all the technology providers is we are platform agnostic. So when we go into these projects, the idea is not to take one provider's technology and say all 11 of you buy this. The question is, what are the capabilities that you need both in your technology and in your people? And when I talk about capabilities with your people, it's not only the skills of the individuals, but the organizational structure to support them. That is the fundamental goal of this alliance, is to figure out what kind of technology and people, organization, skill sets do you need, and you bring that together. That's the reason that we actually think we can move much faster, because what you see usually is you'll get a really nice story, it'd be a big article, whether it's inside HigherEd or one of your competitors, that so-and-so did this with this product, and people go down the rabbit hole of that product without understanding the real issues are not the technology.
So, I mean, the formula across these 11 and from all the other universities I've worked with seems very clear. It has to start with leadership. You actually have to have a president who's a leader, and I will be controversial, not every president is a leader, right? There are exceptional leaders. I work with 11 of them. There are a lot of them out in the field, but there are some university presidents who are more administrators or managers. And you have to have strong leadership, visionary leadership that points out a North Star and repeats themselves until they're blue in the face and make sure everyone knows what direction we're marching in. These two repeat all the time. Everyone at Georgia State and ASU knows exactly what direction they're moving in. So then later, the second piece is change management, right? You have to have the right team, the right people who actually respect and aren't just, condescendingly getting buy-in. They actually try and design innovations and design systems and teams to drive change. But third piece is you have to have the technology, and finding the right technology. After you have those first two, there are all kinds. We need to have a vibrant and thriving ed tech sector. My issue is I wish ed tech would. I wrote a piece that's in EdSurge today about this, but I just wish ed tech would spend a little bit more time on project management and onboarding, because busy administrators don't have time to, it's not lobbing something over the fence. You've got to design it so it seamlessly integrates into, they have 40 different systems. It's hard. They're also doing a real job on top of it. They don't have time to try and prototype your system for them. So it has to be seamless. The first step of design is empathy and understanding really what administrators go through every day, and the multiple jobs and multiple hats they're carrying. And they're also trying to follow leaders like these who move 900 miles an hour. So we need ed tech to be focused on making sure your projects, the project management and onboarding, don't fall in love with your project. or your product as much, and focus on empathy and design and understanding how to work seamlessly into these campuses.
Well, actually, I want to push that one step further. This is an ideal that I'm stealing from the CEO of a not-for-profit, not a higher ed not-for-profit. But within his organization, which is large and serves a large metropolitan area that I happen to live in, they have an innovation center. And the innovation center is there to integrate new technologies in. And they have one simple rule. If you want to sell them a product, you will come in, install it at your cost, let them try it out. If it works, they'll buy it from you. If you're not willing to install it at your cost, they're not willing to try it out and they're not willing to buy it. These ed tech companies need to actually find a few institutions, go in at their expense, the company's expense, say, we're going to do all that hard work Bridget just described, and we will do it for you, and because we want to show you that our product is the best product out there. That's what the model has to be, because basically what we're finding is institutions are spending a whole lot of money and the products aren't getting integrated because we're doing the work for the companies when the companies should be doing the work to prove their products work in our environment. And that's got to change.
Time for turn to questions. Please put your hand up and we'll start here.
So I'll just speak from the perspective that we're in. We're a tiny ed tech company. We're doing what you say. We completely onboard everyone at our own expense. We want to flip the ROI. We want them to see the results. But what we can't get done is we can't demonstrate student success. And I agree with your assessments, but I think there's a really missing piece here. I interviewed a PhD in higher education leadership and said, who is the person responsible for student success metrics going up? And he could not name that person. And of course we understand presidents who step up to that. But given the realities that, at least from an article that Inside Higher Ed put out, that 70% of presidents' time is going to fundraising right now. It's very difficult to find someone who has an operational level of commitment and accountability at an executive level to deliver these outcomes.
In fact, that's actually one of the things I think, Bridget, you've talked with us about before, is that institutions, some of the institutions, it's very clear who that person is. So at my institution, he's sitting right behind you. But at other institutions...
Duck, Tim.
That's very convenient. Thank you very much. But the point is that is not the norm that every institution knows. And in fact, one of the things I think you've learned in this alliance is the institutions where the person in the alliance who's doing this work has a direct communication line to the president, the uptake happens much more quickly. And this is one of the pieces that we're learning is actually what are those communication lines through the different levels of the organization and identifying who is that champion. And that's part of what Bridget works on all the time, trying to figure out within each of these 11 institutions, who is that person that actually is responsible for making the needle move.
Yeah, and I would add one thing. And so in our institution's case, we actually have all of our goals are identified in a single document, which also includes our charter, our aspirational vision, what we call our design aspirations, but each of the metrics, our retention rate, our graduation rate, the number of students we want to graduate, the socioeconomic diversity of the students, so everything's known to everyone inside the institution and everyone that studies us from outside the institution. Anyone that comes in that has a tool, it's not like there's a person in charge of this. Every dean, the provost, others in the institution, they know our retention goals, they know our socioeconomic diversity goals. Every tool then has to be put against that goal. I believe that this tool will be able to affect and impact that goal in the following way, in the following time frame. And so plugging that in different places, in our case, has then led to the integration of 100 plus of these tools and devices and systems, as well as many, many that have been built and so forth. And just a comment on the fundraising, 70%. So I don't spend any of my time fundraising, none. And we have lots of money that we're raising and so forth because we're not fundraising. I mean, I was going to take exception to the idea. We are advancing an agenda that people can choose to invest in or not. And we seek investors to invest in our agenda and what we're attempting to achieve. So we don't spend, all we talk about is what we're trying to do. Do we have people write us checks and give us money and so forth? The answer is yes. But that isn't our principal objective. If people are doing that, it's like, wow, then what's really going on at the college? They're just feeding the beast.
I actually can validate that because I followed you around for a year. I've never sat in on a meeting that you were in that was a fundraising meeting. So, yeah.
So 0%.
Other questions? Nothing? Seriously? Okay. In the orange.
At what point do you take these innovations that you've found and discovered and iterated on, and also those tightly held failure stories, and share it with the rest of the world outside of the 11?
So we actually have some now. We didn't expect to be as far along as we are. We're finding new ways to not just try and document our story, but also innovate the way that stories are told. So yesterday there was a session here, a woman sitting right next to you, Sue Blanchin at Michigan State, telling the story of how Michigan State is innovating because of something they learned at Georgia State. We're trying to create new events and we're trying to advise on conferences to get them to be more concise, less panels, less keynotes, more micro TED Talks, things like that. So yesterday we started. It's still early. We also have we recently released our new round of data. So we're at a point where we're just now. We needed to kind of put our heads down and get the work done. And now, when we started, we had 3 campuses who were using predictive analytics. Now we have 10. We're now starting a 10,000 student random control trial that Tim Rice from Georgia State dreamed up, and now we're rolling out to try and actually put evidence and data on the table instead of speculation and ideas, just theoretical ideas about what works. So that's a hard question for me to answer. I would tell you this. I don't believe that if I use the existing methods out there, so we have to simultaneously be scaling, be innovative, and also innovate the way that we diffuse ideas. So that's the part where we're struggling right now, is trying to help change the sector.
You're off mic, Bridget.
I can pretty much bet you'll read about them on our site eventually. Other questions, please, in the back. Can you hand that mic back, please? Thank you.
Many of the problems that you're dealing with are problems that started earlier than college. And I was curious, how many of the innovations that you're doing are applicable to secondary schools, and what is your responsibility that you feel in order to help work in trying to adapt them to those areas?
I'm going to take that. So I don't know that I would care. I mean, I know your question. I understand your question, and that is that we're taking broad cross sections of qualified students who are not elitely qualified to come to the university. So I don't exactly characterize what they come with as problems. I characterize what they come with as a breadth of types of intelligence, from an even broader breadth of family and cultural experiences, from an even broader breadth of resources that they have in their overall mix. That then gives us this actual society. We don't have a selected sub-society. We have some actual representation of society. So whatever is the mix of human character, human intelligence types and mixes of types, that's what we're dealing with. So I don't necessarily see it as problems, because I don't take as a given, going back to our engineering school where we've greatly improved the freshman retention rate while tripling the diversity of the school. What we found is that there are so many myths out there. This kid can't learn math. False. False. It's not true. This kid didn't have a good teacher, so therefore they can't be an engineer. False. And so it doesn't mean that there aren't some exceptions to that, where no matter how hard you adjust and individualize and customize learning. So I have this thing, like, if I hear someone in our institution use the word remedial, I say, please don't use that word with me anymore. Remedial, who are you? God? You're like this fantastic thing, and somebody else is somehow some remedial individual that's got to be brought up to some standard because they happen to have gone to a high school that didn't have a calculus teacher that could instill into everyone an automatic understanding of a three-dimensional math form. I mean, it's just, that isn't the way we think. And so it isn't really what you asked, but the way we deal with it is unbelievable focus on individualization and unbelievable focus on the outcomes for every individual student. So we can talk a little bit more, but that's the...
And we've got a variety of experiments taking place within institutions that are part of the Alliance. So Central Florida and their partnership with Valencia Community College is one of those models. Our institution at Georgia State, because of what we've done with our undergraduates and improving the graduation rates, our Board of Regents came to us and said, you've got this 20,000 student, 5-campus, 2-year institution. I won't call it a community college because it's pretty more narrowly focused than your traditional community college. But it's an open access institution that gives associate's degrees. And historically, 20% or more of our undergraduates have come from that institution. They've done well. But historically, only about 10 to 13% of those who started actually got somewhere, and the majority dropped out. So as of January, they're now part of our institution, and we're actually taking to scale to see if the systems and programs that we've built can be translated to a student population that is not well prepared as our traditional freshman population. So there's a variety of these experiments trying to get at exactly those issues. And if the sign behind you didn't say 1 minute, I can give another one. But there's a number of experiments underway at several of the institutions within the Alliance.
And I'm going to give Bridget the last word.
Okay.
I would just say that we believe that universities were not designed around students. They were designed around faculty and administrators. And it's going to actually take a lot of hard work for us to redesign our institutions around student success. And you want us to do that and focus narrowly on that. We think there are a lot of other challenges that we can take up. And once we get through this, we want to work with other different other sectors. We're not interested in blaming K-12 or blaming others. We actually want to own this very big problem. And so our hope is that we find others who believe that this is an important objective and who are willing to do this hard work. And what we think is long-term, a series of networks like this across the country so that we can actually accelerate innovation no matter what institution you're at. So we're working to prototype the method. We want to create the playbook. And we're looking for people who believe what we believe, and we hope that's among you all. But with the ed tech folks, how we can be of service is hopefully giving you guidance and suggestions and direction based on what we're seeing works for us. But yeah, I would say we're, give us some more time.
We're in the early innings.
I want to thank Bridget Burns, Mark Becker, Mike Crow, and Arizona State and thank you for coming.